Hello, I'm Bill Haney. Let's have a conversation. And that conversation today is going to be with Alicia Arkwright, who's the Director of Development for the North Oakland Headwaters Land Conservancy, which we will call today mostly the NOHLC or the Conservancy. It's a very important organization which is highly respected by many people, but yet not as well known as it ought to be by many others. So we're going to find out more about that today with Alicia, who brings a degree in environmental studies from the University of Oregon and is pursuing a master's in public administration now at Wayne State University. She's also an entrepreneur. She's had experience in sales and marketing and political advocacy, all of which is going to be helpful to her in her position. And she's well plugged in with staff already at NOHLC. They have a great staff there. Sue Julian is the executive director. Mike Doherty, who's excellent photography you're going to see throughout this program, is the treasurer. And Chris Hardman is the communications director, but they have a number of excellent folks there and lots of volunteers. They can always use more, I'm sure, and maybe we'll hear more about that. The Conservancy is located here in Clarkston. It's a community-supported organization and really one of the most senior groups like this, if not the most, in the state. And I think you're coming up on your 50th year.
You're right.
Yeah, founded in, what would that be, 72?
1972, right here in Independence Township.
Yeah. And it had been kind of a private thing for a few years, or a couple of people got behind it. Mm-hmm. And one of them was the local supervisor, who must have been pretty visionary to see that what we've got here in Independence Township and Clarkston area is very unique. The headwaters of, is it 3 or 4 rivers?
It's 4 rivers in this particular area, which is the Clinton, the Huron, the Shiawassee, and the Flint River. And you're just right that I believe those community members really identified this spot as a really unique, special location in that it was right on the edge of development, and yet even though this used to be the up north for Michigan, Michiganders in Detroit,
right.
They found that there were just a lot of unique habitats here in need of preservation, as well as scenic beauty that everybody in the community really enjoyed and wanted to keep around and have still be viable.
I can attest to that because I lived in and grew up in what is now called Troy, which then was just a number of little villages, one called Big Beaver. And we would come out here in the 40s and 50s, and people in Ferndale and Royal Oak and those towns recognized that what was existing out here was pretty unusual, pretty terrific, without any name on it, and without really any organization like the Conservancy protecting it, preserving it for the future. So that was a visionary move on their part.
Absolutely, and you're just right, it's protected forever. So once land comes into our possession, you know, we are now, and the community members, because we are, as you said earlier, a community-run, started organization, and so the lifeblood of our organization is really community members like you. And once the properties come into our possessions, we protect them in perpetuity, and that includes land stewardship and any sort of acquisition via whether private owners are interested in giving land or there's just larger parcels of land in need of preservation. And we also work, in addition to community members, with municipalities like Springfield Township, Independence Township. There's lots of partnerships that exist there as well. So beyond just a small community organization, I feel as though the area on a whole really sees the beauty and necessity of preserving this area.
And you're doing some very exciting things right now. I know that I live not far from Sashabaw, a bit north, almost at the county line. But is it maybe near Sashabaw, maybe, where you got a project?
So it's right off of Maybe Road, and it's not a yet public preserve, but we've been working with Michigan DEQ for 5 years now. We're in our 5th year, and it's a remediation project. And what we have done is really, really focus on managing water systems there and water runoff, as well as planting native species. So you can go there in bloom time, peak bloom time. Once it's public, you can go there. But right now, in peak bloom time, you see a myriad of wildflowers that are gorgeous. You know, we've got the coneflowers, the cardinal flowers, lots of really beautiful species that are now flourishing there. And as a consequence of that, we have pollinators galore and birds, and life just comes back once you kind of care for it and put time into building that ecosystem back up.
I remember going to the parking lot at Neiman's last year, the year before, several times to get native plants.
Yay!
Yeah, and I planted them, they caught well. But that comes up every June, but is it twice a year? But in June, you have a sale of the native plants.
You're right. You're referencing our native plant sale, and we have it on a biannual basis. So typically in the spring, I know coming from the West Coast, June was already summer, but here I'm realizing it's still pretty spring here, which is glorious because spring is definitely my favorite season in Michigan. So we have our spring plant sale, which is coming, which is on June 12th, and it'll be, like you said, it's in the Neiman's parking lot, and we have trees, flowers, shrubs, native grasses, anything that you're looking for, different types of areas as well. If it's a sunny area, a shaded area, an area that has a lot of moisture, and really anything that you're looking for or the type of land you have, we have a plant for you.
Well, and another thing you're doing is really the flip side of that, which is eradicating the non-native species like phragmites or phragmates or phragmites, because people pronounce it every which way, which is Australian weedgrass, which is invasive, really invasive, and is crowding out our native cattails and other things. And isn't that one of the projects that you folks have, or you work with other organizations to try to keep that under control and eliminate it if you can?
Yeah, exactly that. That's one of the motivations of our spring plant sale and our fall plant sale, is that it's an educational component to the organization as well. So we really, the main mission behind the sale is really just to perpetuate knowledge around native plants and why it is so beneficial to just even in your own small little garden, even though you don't feel as though that might make an impact, many people collectively together planting native species makes a big impact. And so a lot of, we get questions around, why is it important to eradicate invasive species? They're already here, and that's kind of how evolution works. If things go on and you gotta, things adapt, and it's just a part of life, isn't it? And on that flip side, or on that point of view, I do agree with some degree, but also there's a real detriment to invasive species taking over and completely outcompeting native species. It's not just now we have a ton of phragmites and that's now outcompeting the cattails. What you're doing is you're taking food sources and habitat away from other animals or insects, and so it starts to be a snowball effect, where it leads to biodiversity decline and ecosystem collapses. And so it really, although native invasive species are a part of the evolutionary cycle, it's really not healthy for the ecosystems that exist, and it's really not giving any sort of other plants a fair shot at existing.
Well, we know that from the threat that Asian carp pose to the Great Lakes, and it would be catastrophic if Asian carp got into the Great Lakes and dominated, and it would destroy the fisheries, and it would be an economic disaster for tourism. So we do know that an invasive species can cause enormous consequences. So I'm glad that that NOHLC and other organizations are doing what they can to keep this under control. But in addition to that, I know that you have other projects that over the years have preserved land. For example, and I always mispronounce it, and Sue Julian would correct me. It's like the power chic skitterling.
You're
butterfly.
so close. You're so close.
Fix it up for me.
The power chic skipperling.
Skipperling, right. Well, Sue took me and some others from my Clarkston area backyard birders club, another sister organization that works with the NOHLC, and took us out to Davisburg. And where there were, now again, I might not have the number right, but it seemed to me that there were only 78 or so of these little critters still left in all the world. And of course, the textbook example of how you can bring a species back is the Kirtland's warbler, which was almost extinct 60, 70 years ago, and now is proliferated. It's still not enough of them in the world as far as I'm concerned, but it's recovered greatly. Now, I don't know if your little butterfly is going to make it, but isn't that the kind of thing that if you guys don't do it, nobody will?
You know, isn't that something just in life in general? I think if somebody isn't there to stand up for something, who will?
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest motto I think replays in my mind and a lot of my peers' mind and colleagues' mind is even though we know that we're not going to be able to maybe save the power chic skipperling butterfly, the work that comes from identifying the habitat they live in, understanding their life cycle, understanding the habitat threats that has contributed to the decline in the species will not only, maybe potentially, ideally, benefit the power chic, but will hopefully benefit other species because the power chic right now is in critical endangerment. And I know in June they're going to start the surveying out at the Davis Lake Overlook that you've been there. And so we'll be able to get some updated numbers this summer and kind of see how the species is either rebounding or not. But really, the power chic skipperling is a signal species for several other species in the decline globally. So the work that's going into it and the people, the scientists, the organizations, the municipalities, everybody that's banding together to focus their resources on how to not necessarily save it, but save it, is invaluable. It's going to go beyond the power chic skipperling.
Yeah, it's the modern equivalent of the canary in the mine shaft
100%.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
And some of these lands that you get, and maybe most of them, are they donated to people in their estate to become part of the Conservancy? How does that work?
Well, you just hit it on the nail. That is one way that you can support the Conservancy as far as the land donation aspect. We have people who have 40 acres and and they love the land and it's in their family, it's in their lifeblood, they've grown up on it, maybe it's been passed down for generations, and inevitably development is a potential risk for certain areas. And it's not that our organization is anti-development, but what we really strive towards is to try to understand compatible development and really work alongside the growth of business, as well as understanding how the resources from nature, such as fresh water, biodiversity, having many species in the area, how we can coexist with them and really develop compatibly.
Right.
So that is one way people donate parcels of land. They also, another really, really interesting concept that I didn't understand until I really started working with the Conservancy is something called the conservation easement. And this is an agreement between the Conservancy and a private landowner. And it's a legal document between the two, where the private landowner still owns the land. However, the Conservancy is the steward of the land. And so the landowner and the Conservancy, we work together to identify what's the type of activities you want to continue doing on the land. After, what's your legacy and how you want your land to be remained or to proceed into the future. The Land Conservancy is taking on the responsibility to saying, we will see out your wishes for you, and we will ensure that this land that you love so much and that your family loves so much is protected in perpetuity. Wow. And so a conservation easement and a fee property, it's called, a land donation, or excuse me, I mixed that up. Land donation which has numerous tax benefits for the private donor, a conservation easement, which too has tax benefits for the private donor, and then something that we do, which we're doing with the Powashik, is called, it's a fee property, and we purchase the land.
Ah.
So those are the three main ways that we acquire land.
Well, now, okay, all of this takes volunteer effort, and it takes cooperation with the local authorities. Probably also takes some money. So do you have, I'm not going to say sugar daddies, but do you have corporations or organizations that are regular supporters of financially for you?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, that's kind of what I'm in the throes of right now as far as my season of work is working with some of our corporate sponsors to help us put on our largest fundraiser of the year in October. And so far we have MSU Federal Credit Union on board, and they've been consistent for the past 2 years. All Saints Preserve at Mount Elliott Cemetery is the most beautiful cemetery I've ever been to, and they plant native plants, and they do natural burials, and they've been a supporter of ours for 7 years. And they're very committed to the mission, very committed to the land. We also have AJ from Detroit Bold, who is an amazing human being, and you've worked with him. He just jumped on board to support, and his community values are really just something that we're so proud to be a part of. And Cardno, which is a company in the area, has been a supporter for a very long time. So we have a lot of really amazing corporate groups who see the value in this compatible development concept. Actually, a unique partnership that we have with our plant sale coming up in June 12th, is they're grown by a nursery called Wild Type, and Bill is the owner of Wild Type Nursery, and they hand grow everything in their hothouses, and they're all native plants. So his nursery completely specializes in native Michigan plants.
Well, you mentioned AJ ONeill, and I will elaborate a bit on that simply because AJ is typical of what we need more of, frankly, which is somebody who really takes it seriously and does everything that he can. AJ ONeill founded Detroit Bold Coffee Company. And it was an outgrowth of a cafe that he had in Ferndale, where he was doing everything he could for the local community. And AJ is one of the younger of the coffee geezers that we meet every Monday, and we solve the world's problems every Monday. And then, as I've mentioned, we have to come back the next Monday and do it all over again. But he's the kind of a life force that I think your organization has, fortunately, has many of, and you can never have too many. But are you accepting new members all the time?
Absolutely. As far as the corporate side of things, we're always looking to connect with companies that are interested in learning more about the mission, maybe would like to participate somehow. You know, we're even open to doing stewardship work days with maybe a company, especially after COVID. I know people are itching to get outside, and it may be a great community or employee engagement activity for certain companies if they wanted to come out and do stewardship work and get their hands dirty and see what the land around them is like.
Well, one of our guests in past years, before COVID slowed us down last year, was Bob McGowan, who founded the Clarkston Area Backyard Birders Club, which grew from 18 to 157 people in a couple of years, and which is totally free and enjoyable opportunity and experience for everybody of any age. But he also created a community plant a row garden about 30 years ago, which every year gives upwards of 2 tons and sometimes more of fresh organic vegetables to the needy, to OSEF or to other organizations that distribute it. And I mention this because a lot of these organizations are collegial and collaborative and work with each other. Many of the members in the Backyard Birders Club are also in NOHLC. Emily is the president of the board, right?
Right.
Yeah, and Emily Duthan
Yep.
is also sustaining member of the Backyard Birders Club. And so these are interrelated organizations, but they all have in common a desire to preserve what we got here, the natural resources that are so delicate. And I think over the years, people were relatively indifferent about the damage being done with toxic waste spills and things like that, that I think there's more awareness of now and more respect. And I think your organization has had a great deal to do with that and probably will more, but are there many other conservancies? Yours was one of the first, if not the first, in Michigan.
It was the first incorporated in Michigan, I think by a few months.
And almost 50, 50 years ago. Are you going to do an event, it's Golden Jubilee celebration next year?
Yes, actually, thank you for reminding me about that. So we're kind of in the works of planning our 50th year. We're all really excited about it in the office. It's a big milestone in the nonprofit world and in the Land Conservancy world as a whole. 50 years is a long time, and it just honestly goes back to show a nonprofit and a land conservancy like ours cannot be in existence without community members, support of other organizations, companies in the area, passionate individuals wanting to learn about what is this invasive garlic mustard and what can be my part in my backyard to help contribute to the beautification and the health of the ecosystems in this area. And so 50 years is just a testament to the commitment to the people in this area. They're passionate about what we have here and passionate about something bigger than themselves, about the ecosystems, about fresh water that benefits not only our community, but water systems all the way to the Detroit River, all the way to the Great Lakes.
Yes.
It's an interconnected level of care that is something bigger.
Well, we learned that to our dismay with tragedy in Flint with the poisoning of the water system with lead, inadvertently, of course, but regrettably, and with lifelong consequences for many, many, many people. But Michigan is unique in that other states border on the Great Lakes, of course, but I think Michigan has perhaps the longest inland sea coastline. And Florida has a lot, and Alaska does, and California, but for fresh water, and we have, my recollection is, some 20% or more of the world's fresh water is right here, and yet much of it comes, and it's amazing to me, from right here with the 4 headwaters.
Yep.
And refresh our memory again of which one. We got Flint, we got Shiawassee, we got, keep going.
Huron.
Huron,
the Huron
yeah,
and
Huron.
the Clinton.
And Clinton, right, yeah.
Yeah, one of the biggest benefits I've received from working with the Land Conservancy is learning the nature and the evolution of Michigan. And coming from, I didn't have any bad feelings towards Michigan when I moved here. I was like, oh, there's pretty things here, great. But I came from mountains, the ocean, and I was so deeply steeped in the nature out there that I never really gave any thought to the nature out here. And Sue has, and Emily, and quite frankly, a lot of the people in the organization have such a wealth of knowledge about the process of Michigan and how it formed. And it's made me fall so in love with this state and the uniqueness of this state. And 10,000 years ago, there was a mile-high glacier here, and we are in a region that's called the interlobe, which so the glacier has multiple lobes, and we are on the interlobe, so it's inside 2 lobes. And what that means is when the glacier recedes and goes forward, recedes and goes forward, you have debris, sand, clay falling into these areas, making these unique wetlands. So the clay and the sand have a certain level of permeability, and so what it does is it traps the water that melts off here. And I'm sure most people are familiar with the kettle lakes and how they're formed, pieces of icebergs, you know, moving into a certain area, dropping from the glacier and then melting and now becoming a beautiful lake, freshwater lake. But the wetlands are interconnected. It's almost the secret agent between all of these more visible pieces of water, the lakes, the streams, the creeks. You have these wetlands that are all connected to everything, and they are so important to the freshwater systems and the water that we drink and the water that comes into the lakes or comes into these rivers that then go out towards Flint or out towards Detroit or out towards the Great Lakes. So this region is so unique, and because, you know, with water comes life.
Well, yes, I was going to say that we have, in my place in Brandon Township, we have trumpeter swans, which wouldn't be there if we didn't have the marsh areas, the wetlands that you're talking about, and sandhill cranes, and several other kind of birds. That's it. That's their homeland. That's we're fortunate. We really are to have such a diversity, and especially in this area. Well, it's been delightful to talk with you and to hear more about NOHLC, which is, as I say, very well known by people that are aware of the consequences of if we're not good stewards of the land. And so they have deep respect and affection for what's being done at NOHLC, but other folks probably aren't aware that they're the beneficiaries of the work that you folks are doing to preserve and protect our land. So, delighted to have you here, and I wish you good fortune. I will go to your events, whether in June or whether in the fall. And I forgot the name. It's something like Bash, in the fall. What's the name of it?
Wild Night Out.
Wild Night Out, yeah, which is fun.
It
really is a wonderful evening. And so I hope that continues now that perhaps we have more freedom from the COVID experience that we've all had to endure. And I'm delighted to have had you here, Alicia.
Well,
thank
Bill,
you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Everybody in the office was so tickled when you came up with the idea to have us on again. We really, everybody loves you and loves the work that you do to help support all of these organizations.
Well, we've got some great ones in the area, and they definitely deserve our support. And I want to thank our viewers for staying with us, and remind you that we have a roster of interesting guests coming up, pent-up demand from not having many of these last year. But thank you very much for joining us with another Conversation with Bill.